Hello, Viva la Renaissance. I have missed you so. I am crawling out of the, what is this? What is happening? I can't quite call it wreckage. It's like a natural disaster. It's like, what is it? What is this crazy feeling? Why is everything so hard for no good reason? I am with you, people. I am crawling out to give you a little ray of hope. I hope you are feeling a little optimistic. It is November. It is a new moon. I am at my studio, The Nest. There's all kinds of construction and things going on here today. But I went out and I did a lovely interview in person, the way I like to do, which is how this podcast was meant to be, is in person. I always had a hard time getting with the Zoom vibe. This podcast, I wanted to have videos of everyone's spaces and have, just go to artist studios and see with my own eyes and talk in their space surrounded by their things. So, I guess that's one reason it's season 2 and only episode 8, It's like, I don't know. So I'm trying to get back to it a little bit, and I've got some exciting developments which will be revealed in this podcast, but I would not be doing my duty as the mother of this beautiful nest here, the creator, the incubator of the creative eggs. I am in the middle of a fundraiser trying to get this place finished. And if you are listening to this, you've probably been following me for a long time and know my journey from 2017 when I was canceled and lost my reputation, my career, life as I knew it, and went down this deep dive of trying to figure out why and what the fuck was wrong with everyone, and some combination of psychotic feminists, algorithmic technology, bad timing, astrological fuckery, and all kinds of things, and then going to move to LA, escaping LA during COVID, making my way to the foothills of the Sierra Mountains here in this forest, and all the trials and tribulations of trying to hold on to a place while barely having any lodging for myself in these crazy, crazy times. So it's just time to get this thing finished. You all know I moved in here May 1st of 2020 on Beltane, and I have been paddling real hard ever since. So with the addition of a new artist in residence who you'll be meeting in this episode, we have launched this fundraiser, and we're just going for it. We're going for $14,000, which is still pretty cheap for all the things we're planning with sound and lights and flooring and all the things. We're trying to get this place up and running. If I could get a Christmas show going, you guys know I would, and Christmas shows are always my favorite. So anyway, we're doing this big fundraiser, and I wanted to introduce you to my collaborator, and this is a real exciting development of the Nest also, because it ushers in a new era of inviting other artists to come here and work with me, to be artists in residence. So it's just really exciting. Anyway, I'm not going to ruin it all. You can listen, but please go check out the GoFundMe. It is under Hatch the Nest. And enjoy this interview. I did this out in nature even. We went for a little drive out to a park nearby, and you'll hear dog friend's collar in the background, and then it gets a little cold, so we had to move locations. So there's a little bit sound difference, and I still don't have any help. I'm just getting this out to y'all. It's real rough style, in these times. We just got to get the word out. So I'm getting it to you, and I hope you enjoy. I am sitting here out in a beautiful park on Round Mountain with Donny Boots, who is the artist in residence at the Nest that I'm really excited to introduce all of my listeners to, because this is near and dear to my heart. As many of you know, the Nest is my studio in Nevada City, which I have been building to be a art production and esoteric film studio that is also kind of an artist's Elks Lodge. And this is the first artist in residence that I've invited into the place, and that's always been part of my vision. So I'm really excited to have you be the guinea pig. You're the first artist in residence of the Nest, and I'm so excited to introduce everyone to you. Say hello.
Well, I was just a wandering owl out there, out on the road, so it sure was nice to find a nest.
why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about who you are, where you're from, how you came to be at the Nest?
Well, my name is Donny Boots, but you can call me Donny Boots. I was born Midsummer's Eve in the good year 1977 in New York City. And I hitchhiked out of there in 1994. Went up to Woodstock because of a hippie girl I met at the wetlands. Left the city, made it out west, never went back to high school, never quite made it back, and never psychologically really made it out of the 90s, to be honest with you. And continued on similar 90s based migration trails and slowly watched them decay into high rises and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
And then I spent the last few years doing like tea house kind of astrology, poetry kind of projects in the Southeast and the Gulf Coast and in Central Florida in particular. And yeah, I was just, to be honest, I was on my way over to Austria, man, to go do some cool stuff with my buddy that I thought would just sounded fun. And then I got that wild scent, and I was like, oh, sorry, bro. We got to do one more trip to Cali. So I came out here in like early June, and I was just kind of popping around and following my nose. I didn't have any commitments or anything. I was working on some music and working on some writing and some letters, and just being a kind of like astrocomical nerd in the forest and hoping to find a good time.
So tell me about your experience with opening tea houses. This is a big thing that I'm being exposed to by you, which is really fun because now that we're in the studio and we're working together and you're making me all kinds of tea and fun concoctions and telling me just a lot about the ritual of it and everything, and I'm so delighted to have that be part of the offerings of what we're working on at the Nest, and I just love all the history that you talk about with that.
Yeah, the tea thing is so interesting to me. I mean, I don't know how it really happened, but my family owned pubs in Ireland and Scotland for many, many generations. And then we had, pardon me, smaller stakes in numerous pubs in New York, like over the ages. Not so much. My dad ended up going into education, and my uncle's like a firefighter, and yada, yada. Kind of went like different ways. But I'm really into, since I was little, I was always really into what our like Irish and Scottish, you know, because my grandfather was born in Glasgow, kind of like on the run from like weird stuff in Northern Ireland and yada yada. They were like, you know, like Catholics and stuff, and getting in all this mess. So I was always interested in that period of how they actually had these, you know, kind of like underground rebel B&Bs and inns and pubs, and they got in all sorts of mess with the English years ago. When my grandfather was a kid, I guess, and that's how they ended up over here. So I was always interested in following like back to like, I was like, what were we doing before we came to New York? Because I was just following this chain of interrupted families, kind of, you know, this like intergenerational what the fuck kind of vibe that I seem to share with a lot of my friends. You know, I was like, dude, I don't know, it's so interesting to me. So I've always been a drinker since I was like really little, like whiskey on the thumb, Irish, you know. But then I lived in Hollywood, New York, and so like, you know what I mean, my natural, you know what I mean, ceremonial ancestral drink, let's say, got a little out of hand in those environments when mixed with other, you know what I mean, other varieties of experience. And so I was just getting older, you know, I'm like 44 now, but I got into the tea thing, I guess it was like in my like mid 30s or something like that. And I was just looking to like get clean and healthy and sober up. You know, I was just like, not trying to get sober necessarily like California, but I was just like, something else needs to be like leading the social charge of my life. You know what I'm saying? I was like, I've been on my feet, you know, in New York or in LA or in the Bay or on the road, just like, you know, I was like, how do we like just sit down maybe and just chill? And then I was like, man, like tea, you know, I mean, it's like kind of lame to me. I mean, this was my perspective then, and it still is for, you know, I'm not into a lot of the like fancy pants part of it. It just wouldn't be real. I don't have any fancy pants. Like, look at these pants. These are the pants right now, you know, they're not fancy. Yeah, these aren't. And I think they're kind of fancy with the fleece. But so I was really trying to figure out like how to still chill and like build a vibe without booze. And I don't, it's just one of those weird synchronicities. I guess you would say I kind of like prayed and, you know what I mean, kind of like meditated on, but it's all like super unexpected and kind of came out of nowhere. But I ran into an old buddy who I known from like the 90s on Dead Tour, man. Like there was just, that's how ridiculous this is. I ran into that. It's not like I hadn't seen him since then, but practically. And I ran into him, he's all like clean and his like aura's all like shiny. You know what I mean? He's like, you know what I mean? You can afford like hippie healthcare products, obviously. I see him in the salad bar at the co-op. He's like, what's up, bro? You know what I mean? He's like throwing lobster in there. I was like, that's like a $30 salad. I was like, what's going on, man? He's like, oh man, I got really into tea. And so he had gotten really into this pu'er tea via this dude, David, who has this tea house, Hidden Peak Tea House down in Santa Cruz, which has been around long enough. It's like a part of the fabric of the tea scene in the Bay Area. David's a legend. Like he's a living library of like good vibes and, you know, old school culture. He's like my elder. Like when I was like 17, it was like 17 or 18, first traveled through Santa Cruz, just like hitchhiking, you know what I mean? Reading Dharma Bum, seeing if we could pull it off, you know? Those, Dave and those guys, I think were like between 25 and 30, but like at that age, they're so much older than you and they like had their shit together. Like they had been doing yoga. So to kids from the 90s, those dudes were actually pretty epic and they're kind of like, I think about them and they do seem like these archetypal like ancestors from a higher time. Yeah. Like I know they were going to like dead shows and rainbow gatherings when they weren't so whack. You know what I mean? They weren't like even as corporatized or shady or even just like ridiculous hippie as they got at certain points, you know, for whatever reason. So Dave was a good old friend of mine. And then so the pu'er, they were like, yeah, there's this guy, Master Wong, who put David onto this, you know, this special pu'er tea. He's down in Oakland. I'm on my way to Mexico. I can drop you off at his house for the weekend if you want. I'll go to Mexico and then I fly back into Oakland and we can come back up to Ashland, you know? Okay. And I'm like, cool.
You're like, great.
I was like, all right, yeah, because I'd like just, yeah. So I was like, all right. And then he drops, and I get the address and I'm like, 82nd and International. I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, that's really far east Oakland, man. That's like past Hagenberg. I was like, that's like past the Coliseum. And that's where this dude, this, God rest his soul, this Taoist tea master from tea country, from the Yunnan province of China, specifically from this area, Tengchong, which is like a Champagne area of pu'ers, or it's in the Shangri-La ass part of, you know.
Can you describe for everybody what pu'er is?
So there's 7 colors on the tea rainbow. We're familiar with like white tea, green tea, jade tea, you know, black, and or like what we think of as black tea is kind of like reddish. So this is the black end of the rainbow in tea, is the super black tea, and that's what pu'er is. And it's the blackest of the black because it goes through this really cool like post-fermentation process where the leaves are just, for one, it's a very geographic specific tea leaf. It only grows at certain elevations in a few parts of like Southeast China and a little bit of like Burma and Vietnam. So kind of like, you know, that's it. So at that elevation, it's the highest elevation that any tea leaf grows. But it also happens to be this place that's only in the Himalayan foothills. So the soil is fed by this runoff of, you know, Himalayan snow melt, Himalayan monsoon season, and then all the Himalayan vibes and like Kung Fu master spirit stuff that goes on up there, you know, whatever it is. But it's been cultivated in that area, specifically where Wang was from in Tengchong, for like a solid like 800, conservatively, arguably far longer. So that soil is super rich in minerals and elements that you just can't find in any other tea, because no other tea leaf can be produced in that elevation, in that environment. So then there's so many like kind of metals, if you will. There's so much elemental force in the tea leaf. It's so big, and robust and anti-fragile, actually, that you can dry them very quickly. There's different methods, but like the slow way is just pick them at the right time. You kind of like dry them, get them to this like certain point where there's like barely any like moisture left in them. And you just, of course, you just stick them in a cave for like 10, 20 years, and you come check on it, Taoist style. Over the years, they figured out, in particular in the 70s, they had a lot of breakthroughs in ways to speed up fermentation and get a tea to quote unquote ripen faster, so they become drinkable a little bit sooner. But if you drink it's harder and harder to get a hold of the stuff. It's like super small batch. But that tea, for one, used to be a currency, like on the Silk Road and on the tea horse roads, which are some of the most interesting cultures going all the way back, to the Middle Ages and earlier. So much cool culture passes through. That tea was like a currency because it aged. It would sit. It's like ripe at 20. Yeah, and it comes out, and that was part of the discovery of the tea. They said the monks would come get this fine black tea that grew in Yunnan, but then they would travel so far, they're like nomadic, that they would notice by the time they got like halfway through the brick of tea that it tasted different. And then they would look at the leaves and be like, dude, this thing is like fermenting. They're like, it's alive, bro. Like some monk, you know what I'm saying? In like the 800s and, and like somewhere in Nepal was like, dude.
Yeah.
Does this tea taste different? He's like, stop the donkeys. Stop the donkeys. Hold on. What the fuck? This fucking tea's changing, bro.
Maybe it was yaks.
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Stop the yaks.
It's like, dude, I know we did that ceremony last night with the, you know what I mean? The guys in the robes and the horses, but I'm telling you the tea tastes different.
So explain, I love your stories about Master Wong and your time with him. So tell us what happened then. You were dropped off for the weekend. And what happened next?
God, I never think about the beginning of this story, man. You're bringing me back. God, I'm glad you're asking. So it was so epic. Yeah, I took the BART out to the Coliseum and then like walked, if you know that like route from Hagenberger to 82nd. It's nicknamed the Kill Zone. It's a very, very wild part of East Oakland. I was very, very blessed the whole time I was there. I was like shown nothing but love. It's actually really crazy. People are so nice. And a little bit because they were like, what are you doing here? But then I was like, I don't even have to explain it. I don't know. People are just psychic over there, People know what's going on. So Wong lived out on 82nd, right off International. And he had built, with the little money he was able to round up from investors in China and like old patients. He had been a really successful, he was like one of the early Taoist energy workers and body work guys. He wasn't doing acupuncture or pressure stuff, so he was doing some like cupping, but it was like a kind of more shamanic, like foothill Taoism that you don't really, it's not like in the public that much. I don't know. I probably only saw it around when I was younger because I was just in such weird scenes, you know what I mean? Just like skipped high school, like for the weird. And so he had made connections in like the business world. He had opened a spa that's still there, I think. I forget what it was called, though, Zen Spa. This like fancy pants spa that he had opened with this, with these entrepreneurs. So he'd had this kind of little mini like guru rise, from coming over as like Dr. Wong to then like somehow getting coined like Master Wong. And it was like very obvious that he was a tea master and like a master of medicine, but it caused this little like kind of silly, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't know if there's like mnemonics or what is it? Semantics, where they're like, hi, I'm Master Wong, and then the Cali kids or whatever, they're like, well, he's not a master, and then you're like, maybe not, but it's like, I don't know. We all had like tags in my neighborhood. I mean, like rapper. I mean, yeah, like that rapper's name is Clarence. It's like, all right that he's, you know what I'm saying? There's gangsters named Clarence, bro. Like whatever. Like, so I always thought that part was a little silly, but he was a little bit of a controversial figure. Had a really big personality. Had like a really interesting kind of like real Mercury Gemini ass kind of like trippy ego for like a real like Taoist kind of tea sage. Also he's like very, very complex, like very endearing at times, and then also like very rigid and rough, but I had a wonderful time with him. Yeah, we just hit it off that weekend. He was like, oh, I was like, oh yeah, I'm like, like omens and stars, and so it's like I'm just like trying to figure out like how at that time I had been getting really into Like I'd just been making these connections where it seemed to me that no, I had seen this lecture by a Taoist guy who was like, you guys don't know your history, but there was Tai Chi and Qigong all over Europe. He's like, even when they make fun of your witches, they always go, ooh, because he's like, and this is just in the lecture. I mean, he's a cool dude from China. And he's like, hey, even when you put him in the fair, he's like, think about it for a second. Like, that's what the Romans saw. They saw people doing it. Like, these practices used to be worldwide. Maybe not everyone was doing the same thing as the Korean grandmothers in the park every day, but everyone's got some form of energy practice. But the Tai Chi and Qigong in particular for like Eurasian people, of which some, or if like most Caucasians, kind of their ancestors fit into this kind of like Eurasian nomadic steppe kind of culture at some point anyway, you know. So those were the kind of things I was studying at the time, and I was studying like Silk Road stuff. So Master Wong was like, oh, huh. He's like, all right. He's like, and so I'm meeting him late in his career when he hates hippies. He hates San Francisco. He's like, I used to be a nice guy. I wear nice Taoist robes and I pour tea for all the hippies. He's like, all the hippies came to my temple. And then he's like, but now you know what I say to them when they come to my house? I say, shut the fuck up and drink this tea and tell me if you want to buy some. And I was like, wow. And I always would meet people, but he's like, I learned from your buddy David. Oh, and then he knew that I knew David and that we were both New Yorkers. So it was just like, that's what I'm saying. It was like this weird connection because I knew this old school dude that he knew. And he was like, all right, you got to pass because, David's made me money. Like, David's my guy, you know? And he was. David's fucking a big deal in tea world, you know? Anyway, so he's like, all right. He's like, you've got a chance. He's like, you're trainable. That's what he said. He's like, you're trainable. And he's like, all right, we'll wake up tomorrow, 4 o'clock in the morning. I was like, all right, whatever, dude. You know? And the fucking next day, dude, 4 o'clock, he was like, all right, let's get it going. And I was like, what is this shit? He's like, get the hot water. I was like, this can't be like some karate. You know what I mean? I was like, don't even give me a joke with the tea, and I hate tea puns. You know what I'm saying? I was like, this is some karate kid shit. And it really did end up in a real bootleg, like fucking East Oakland, vintage antique hustle, like salvage hustle. We like lived on Craigslist free, and we had literally tons of tea and fine tea ware from China and all these real unique Chinese antiques and like beautiful shit that he had. He had very fine taste and like high level manifestation skills. Like that dude would find shit and then get people to give it up for like cheap. You know what I mean? Like, wood burning stoves, like a key obsession for years. I drove all over the Bay, up and down the coast, wheeling and dealing. Yeah, for high-end antique wood burning stoves, like big, crazy ones. Yeah.
Wait, so how long were you with him?
When I think about it, I think I served a year in 2 little patches with him. I think I did 6 months twice or something like that.
So you stayed that first weekend for 6 months?
Yeah, basically.
At his house?
Yeah, so he's like, all right, you seem trainable. I have a little nook in my attic that I built for my kids. You can rent it for $500 a month, and I'll show you how to drink this tea. You help me out around the house.
Great.
I was like, all right. And he goes, no, he didn't. No garlic onions. He's like, no drugs, okay.
What does that mean?
He wouldn't let you eat garlic and onions in the house. He was like, he had some real fanatical, weird shit with the garlic and onions, but there's a precedent for it in some of those like lineages and some of those diet camps of the world. So it's not like super foreign to everybody, but he really went crazy. Like after I'd been there for a while, I was like, all right, I'm gonna have some people over to come, because we do tea parties in the back and shit. You know what I mean? So I'd be like, all right, I'll try to like hustle some people up and have them come back, and he'd be like, just tell your friends, just please, out of respect for the house, try to not eat garlic and onions for about 1 week before they come over. And I'm like, dude, I'm not telling them that, dude. I just like, fuck. I was like, my brother's in town from New York. I'm like, dude, these are like New Yorkers. Yeah, these are like fucking Italians and shit. You're like, what? It doesn't make sense. I was like, bro, you have to drop this. He's like, it was his thing. I was like, all right. I was like, so I always knew that we were going to go to a certain point and, we had some really amazing times. I think we disappointed each other a couple times.
Aww.
Things got a little like wild at times. You know what I'm saying? We went down some deep like bro holes that you go bro holes. I don't know if I said that before, but we worked hard, man. Like we demolished, like we bought it while I was down there. Like he bought a property out in big like a dual like real old lot with a well on it. He was like, I found a dragon in East Oakland. He's like, wow. It was like this Taoist prophecy was fulfilled, and it was for him. It like really came true, and he pulled it off, man. This guy was like a genius. I've never seen anything like it since, and I've been around like antiques and vintage hustles, and I've known some folks in that area, not like bigwigs or whatever, but he was like multifaceted, and he used his whole appearance and everything like to an amazing advantage in this way that I never seen a man do, without being like even like a hoe or something, or even like a indecent in any way.
Wait, is this the bro hole that you were referencing?
No, so we got just deep in construction projects, on going over budget, like over time, having to salvage and trade and like run out of money, have to like hustle up money. But like we bought that, or he bought that lot. We were living on there. One dude had a yurt. Good old, God bless him, Matt Yergi. Good old Yergi. Fucking God bless him. He had a little yurt because Yergi always has a yurt. He's one of those guys. So then there was this old cabin that was from like 1932, built with huge redwood slabs that had been lived in by cats and rabbits, and I measured it. It was like just under 6 inches of shit in it. Right? I come down. This is where it maybe gets a little weird. You know what I'm saying? But I thought there was going to be a yurt available, so I left Ashland. Me and Luke had a real cool setup, dude. I had a hot tub. We, you know what I mean? Because my buddy. My other buddy, he was doing well, man, and we had this cool tea thing going on, and I don't, so I went down there, and he was like, oh, just clean out the cabin. I was like, really? I was like, man, you want me to clean out 6 inches of shit? Is this really this kind of story? And I fucking did it. I was like, fuck you, Wong, and I did it. And it was just like, that's why he's like my weird bro, like Taoist teacher, you know what I mean? Like, he's such an asshole sometimes, but I did do it, and it took like a week, 2 weeks. I like shoveled it all out in the vinegar, and I was like, boom, boom, boom. Then in the process, like kind of exposed and cleaned all this like real old, just real old like redwood and shit. And I made it a cool ass little cabin. I turned it into a little thing.
One of the other reasons, hold on, Jasmine's standing on your hat.
Nope.
We have my studio neighbor's dog is visiting. You might hear her collar in the background. She's very upset that we aren't throwing the stick for her right now. So the first time I saw you was actually at an outdoor theater show inspired by Greek mythology, particularly the story of Persephone during the equinox. And you were playing kind of it was very funny for me because it was such a huge synchronicity, because I had done a backyard outdoor show inspired by Greek mythology in LA couple years ago. So, and this is like one of the sort of things that's been on the back burner that I still want to get back to. So it was very funny for me to be invited to one of these, and I was like, oh, let's see what's going on. And so it was interesting seeing the similarities and the differences. But you played a character that was similar to one that I had written in my show as well, which I called an astrological weatherman. So you just began the show sort of giving a talk on the stars of that evening, and that was the first time that I had seen you. And then we were introduced a few days later by a mutual friend who connected us, who had also spent time in New York, which New York feels like the connection.
Right.
Yeah, meeting you was super interesting. And then since then, I can honestly say you've been blowing my mind by teaching me about Vedic astrology, because I had been a student of Western astrology for about the last 5 years, and which I had come to, we've talked about this a bit. I had begun studying it mostly just to see what was up with that sort of like way of looking at time, and it definitely expanded my relationship to time and sort of got me into a cyclical rhythm with nature and with looking at the sky to interpret what's happening on the earth, and just connecting. It's connected a lot of dots for me, and also just been a really fun way to learn about myself, my personality, in relation to other forces that are in the world that I have nothing to do with. So I want to hear you describe how you got into Vedic astrology. We don't have to go too much into the differences, aside from there's just different ways of tracking time, and in India it's a different way. So totally. Yeah, just if you can just describe a little bit about how you got into Vedic astrology, and if you want to touch on some of the differences, you can. But yeah, I think everybody would really like to hear that.
Sure. Well, for me, pretty much all of my interests pretty much branch out of my chief interest in Irish history and my like ancestral like tribal um, history in Ireland, and then I just kind of started looking like for folks like us in Irish history, which we pop up all over. It's like it's all about us actually, like the mythology. Yeah, everyone's like, and even there's an it's like a social expectation of like base creativity and artistry over there that's still lingers everywhere, and in some places like still predominant. Yeah, where like after any dinner you go over at the end of the night, so everybody's gonna sing a song, everyone's gonna do a little dig. It's just built in. And I was like, man, that's really interesting. And then of course you see this all over Europe and all over the world, where you're like, there's a time where it's like you got these history books and these myths and like these folk tales, which we can see clearly start coming into like current history. They're at least they're riddles about current history because the shit makes sense, and so I was like, man, that's so trippy that there was just like this really like artistic, dancey kind of like culture. So I just kept going, and then I was like, well, it's kind of trippy. They were like in a megalithic stone building, and they're like, well, that's trippy. Some of those stones are 10 tons big, and they're like, oh, that's kind of crazy. It just keeps getting weirder and weirder, and like to me, like cooler and cooler the further you go back in Irish history, and then you go back into the all the different tribes, because Ireland's just this like ancient international island, like so many different tribes, so many different cultures come through there and get recorded there. There's so much just literal writing down of events because they were into it. There's into the word and always have been. And so in that research, but what I couldn't find was the astrological folk calendar that it ran on, because I was like, well, the one thing I noticed that's really interesting is when things got really nasty around the period of the kind of like Renaissance-ish is kind of like the penal laws period in Ireland. Ireland had been deeply flourishing just before the Italian Renaissance, along with a lot of the European monasteries and stuff like that. What we call the cool Christian era. It was like cool Christianity, monks, nuns, good beers, stone huts. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, green men, folk festivals, like literally no dead dudes on crosses, like none of that mess. It doesn't even exist. Yeah. That image isn't even used in the whatever you call it, in the tradition, So I was just like, man, I really want to know. I'd always been interested in astrology, in particular through the Mayan calendar. I got geeked on the Mayan calendar in like '95. This dude was like, yo, bro, check this out. This is your Mayan glyph. Yellow star. I was like, it's on. I was like, no fucking way. I looked at the fucking thing. I just looked at that glyph with the little yellow star and like the 4 dots in the directions. I was like, this is my shit. And he's like, yellow star, Lamont. I was like, awesome. And I was like, how does this whole thing work? Like, we just sat there on the beach, and I got real into it. At some point, my grandmother had passed away. I had like $200 left in my $1,000 inheritance, which was like huge, for a kid at that time. And I bought a box of Mayan calendars, and I was like going around on the streets in the coffee shop in Santa Cruz and just putting people onto the Mayan calendar. I was like, yo, man, you know about your Mayan glyph? I was like, this shit is cool. Like at the Java house, and these like I forget some of the other even like oh man, on the beach, yeah, like Lighthouse Beach up by the cave. Like it was just hippie fucking goofball summers, man, like 94, 95, 96-ish, I guess, too. And so I'd always been into it, but I just I hadn't been into any of that kind of occult esoteric stuff. It was just really through kind of like getting sober and then dealing with the depression of not being able to like drink and rage anymore. It was like such a big part of my personality. So I had to start because of my like negative thinking about life, I had to start looking for like kind of like healing. I wasn't looking for like, I don't know. I was just looking for some kind of like healing tradition of like storytelling, that existed in Ireland. But for some reason, I really wanted to know like the astrology about it, because I could tell from the books I was reading and shit, like all these stone structures are all astrological, like profoundly astrological. The megalithic complex of of ruins, and some of them still functioning in Ireland. It's like, whoa, that is sophisticated. Like, what were these guys on, right? Definitely mushrooms, you know what I mean? Definitely fasting, definitely like ritual observance of, some elemental forces, because you're like, look at this art. Look at this shit. You know what I mean? It's like spirals, moons. These guys are lit. And they're having a good time. You know what I'm saying? They say, no, you don't see no like. So I was really into it. Couldn't find it. Through my research, I just remember somewhere in like Isis Unveiled or one of those like early theosophical texts, Madame Blavatsky saying something about how the same basic folk astrological system that existed in Ireland existed in northern India in branches of Jyotish, or it was reserved in the system of what they called Jyotish. What we call astrology, right? They call Jyotish, which is an interesting kind of place to maybe. Yeah, it's an interesting place to talk perhaps about the differences, just to start with the words, So Jyotish, Jyotish. And you might recognize Jyoti is a word that pops up. I mean, there's like an Indian international curry brand called Jyoti, and it's like heated up at home. So it's Jyoti. They're smart. That's like good marketing, But Jyotish is the study of light. And that's what was like so cool to me. I was like, wow, that's like high level, man. I was like, that's some like I was like, that's some Star Trek shit, you know what I mean? And even the acronym is like SOL. I was like, oh, soul. I was like, damn. I was like, these guys are crazy. And then, so it's funny, astrology, right? Astrology, astro, like stars. And then logy, we think of it as like language of the stars. Maybe if you get like maybe a higher level of it, like logos of the stars, that's deeper, and I'm cool with that, but it's still talking about like the language of the stars and this way of like reading and divining what is seen, which is super cool, right? Of course. But what Jyotish infers immediately from its name alone is the study of light. So its chief interest is in origins of light, entering a domain, entering a, if you will, closed loop of phenomenon. So really we're looking at how does the light hit the screen first before it's refracted, before it's reflected? What is the origin of that? And how that, this is totally my interpretation of it. I kind of learned some of this a little bit, but everyone's got to put it together for themselves if you go down the road of sidereal, tropical, or, I'm interested in folk calendars in particular. So on what are the ritual days to do the right things, ceremoniously for whatever, that's just fascinating to me. And how to time your springs and your summers and stuff like that.
Like the Farmer's Almanac, sort of.
The farmers, like all of our ancestors did forever in every single culture ever until like maybe a couple hundred years ago. For like everybody though, it's like crazy, this interruption in the sky, and a big part of it is the interruption of the Gregorian calendar. It's like that's where I was going earlier. That's like the 15th century. It's like the Renaissance. We're like, well, I don't know, man. You got like the Gregorian calendar. That's kind of weird. They like changed astronomy forever. They took astrology out of it. They switched the whole jammy, and they knew very well that the Gauls and the Gauls and the Gaels and the Celts and the Bretons and the Germans and all these people that they needed to subdue at the time, like their strength was their ritual calendar. They had this like super unified tribal vibe that worked because they were like literally on the same page with their calendar within their tribe and with the tribes all across Indo-Europe. Like I'm like a Caucasus steppe to China. It's very, very friendly times on the planet, like not that long ago actually. And that record, and the poets' record is like, oh, interesting. The poets are like, dude, we're having a blast. Like, I didn't know that the, like, early 90s in New York would end up being, like, amazing. Like, looking back on it now, it's so cool. But those were, like, shitholes, dude. Like, yeah, it's, like, sounds cool. They're like, oh, we were in, like, Soho on Spring Street in 92. But, like, we were fucking broke. We were chipping in for nickel bags. Like, which is, like, with, like, 6 kids. Chipping in for nickel bags. Just like, and it's, like, nostalgic and like funny now, but our record of those times is different as artists because we look at it as like, dude, it's cool that we're all like burnt out and kind of fragile and vulnerable right now, but we're just expressing the shit out of ourselves. Our parents are nuts, like everything's like whacked. They're trying to like Prozac or Ritalin us or whatever, so we're just like, going on. And for me, what I found in Jyotish is like the poetic record. It's like the artist record of for one, of just like deep and ancient observance of the skies, and just night watching and day watching, just like the Mayans were into. They're like, dude, they just watched and like understand that there's a system and a closed loop going here, and it's actually not that hard to break down. And you're not going to get it perfectly right. I don't think anybody does. It's not meant to be. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter. There's no, you know. But there's a really cool and conceivable and methodological, i.e., like lining up with an entire system of medicine that's accepted throughout the world in Ayurveda, where Jyotish just goes chaplop, just plops right in, you know. They weren't able to bring the Jyotish part to the West when they were, you know, started giving out doctorates and stuff like that, which I understand that and it kind of makes sense. But it's unfortunate because you lose all that story. Like Jyotish.
Yeah, it's like that's the mytho-poetic part. That's kind of like it's the archetypal. It's the bigger part. It's the unfathomable. It's the mystery.
That's where for me Jyotish got so crazy because it was in my like Sati at Saturn return, which for me were at the same time. I just had one of those hammered. I came so close to dying at like 27 and a half. I was so like on that like, and I was in LA, you know what I mean? Like a little bit drunk and tragic and like, yeah, like too much money, man. Like, you know, and I had this like, boom, I had it handed it to me. And it was really this one myth called the Greatness of Saturn, translated by this wonderful gentleman, Dr. Robert Swoboda, who's like a big, just, I don't know, big deal to me, but in the bringing of Ayurveda and like just Vedic awesome roots, like for real Indian culture to the States, you know, many generations back. I mean, they're just really, I think some of the key forefathers and mothers of that energy being out here. And what the Greatness of Saturn is a therapeutic myth, you know, written, you know, like channeled by a spirited poet at some time, I think in like the 900s or something like that. And after a great devotional act that he had made towards Saturn, being like just praying to this like kind of cosmic force of suffering that exists within him and without him, to like show me some, you know, this is like these guys are getting real shamanic and with it, you know, but he's like, show me a way. And this is a story that he brought forth, and it's very methodical. It's very neuro-linguistic programming-y, and very folky and very simple, but it works. And like it was the beginning of the healing of my like greatest depression and my worst period. And like from that, literally from that book and like from the instruction of how that works, I kind of like slowly built this like new personality up from when I was like 33. I was 33. I was back home in New York City in like 2010. And I was like, yo, this book is fucking crazy, dude. I was like so bummed out. I was like calling the NYU like sliding scale hotline. You know what I mean? And I called them and they were like, all right, we'll call you back. Yeah, they're like, we'll call you. They're like, are you having suicidal thoughts? I was like, what the fuck? They're like, we'll call you back. And then when I hung up, I was like, this is bullshit, man. And I literally like got on the N train and went to the Theosophical Society, to the original branch that they opened in 1872 on 53rd Street.
Wow.
My parents grew up right around the corner from where it's like literally right around the corner on the east side over there. And I got the Greatness of Saturn and the Law of Karma, which is like the third book of this trilogy that the same gentleman, Dr. Svoboda, wrote. And I really like rebooted my whole life, like based on this kind of Vedic and just ancient nature loving idea of like healing through story. And I saw it. I was like, dude, that's crazy. But I did read this story and I did it kind of the way the guy said, you know what I mean? I treated it like a little, no fancy pants, but I like lit a candle. I faced the right direction. I did it on Saturdays. You know what I mean? I started donating black and blue jeans to dudes I saw on the train, feeding pigeons on Saturdays. I just did all the folky little remedies that they do for people if they're suffering. Because if you're suffering, then you're stuck inside yourself, and then you lack charity in your life, most likely. If you go do some form of charity or selflessness, like the hole that you were digging, or what was it, like the digging will stop usually at a charitable act, or you know, an act of some kind of like humility and selflessness. And that's kind of what the myth and the book are about. And that turned me on to this this idea of like remedial like storytelling but also like lining it up with certain transits of the sky, because that's what the whole book is about also. And I was like, yo, this shit is cool. I was like, this shit is cool. Because then I started looking at it and I'm like, we're all sitting here looking at old pyramids and crazy parts of Sri Lanka and all these amazing temples in India and Ireland, all those places all over the world. And we're like, you know, who built them? Why? You know, what were they? What were drugs were they on? But it's like, how about like, what was their like general population's psychological system? Like, how did they look at the world that they got all of these right talents to start coming out and blossoming in architects and you know, painters, and how'd they end up manifesting emperors and rulers and princesses that were like, oh, hell no, we're not invading nobody. We're building like stupas and Buddhas. That's our kingdom. Like there's many like super artsy kingdoms that ruled Indo-Europe, you know, even look at like the Bavarian ones. They like, you know, they record him as like the super whack job elven princes, but he's like, no, maybe those guys were just super cool. And yeah, entheogenic as fuck perhaps, but hey, they're royalty. Let them do their, you know what I mean? Let them do their thing. So I really, and then just, you know, Jyotish and Indian mythology and history and culture. I mean, India's like, man, if you could like save India, you save the world, I think. I mean, it's just such an amazing repository and archive of world knowledge and world history. Like there's so much of Greek history just available in the myths of the Danavas. And if you know where to like find the Greeks in the Indian stories, then you're like, oh, dude, we're reading, you know, these are like blue and green-eyed like people. Like you wouldn't think that necessarily, but India's got stuff recorded, you know, from all over because it's just an ancient legacy. And it's just an ancient legacy of like poetry and art, and it's like shit that's actually like too cool. And that the people, like our ancient like bros and sisters that put all the energy into it, they're doing like real like ritual magic and praying their asses off, and they're on vision quests like to try and figure this information out to help each other get well through things. And wherever you're at to be advanced, like, oh dude, there's magic for that, bro. I don't know, but when you want to know a little fucking fairy story. And so we were running on this story-based vibe, and it seemed like things were okay in those story-based eras. So I was like, that's the key. Working with stories.
Yeah, I love that. I consider my work to be, I consider myself a storyteller, even though I do it physically more than actually just telling people. But yeah, I am picking up what you're putting down. Okay, we're back. We had a little location change due to losing the sunlight, and it got really cold really fast. So we got back in the truck, and now we're driving the dirt roads around Mountain in Nevada County to finish this interview. So what I wanted to ask was about the reason that I invited you to join the Nest, which is this idea that you shared with me about that was sounds like it was been an idea percolating for a long time, but that you were ready to bring it into some sort of form in the world, and I was really excited about it. So I want you to tell everyone about the Slow Owls Myth Association.
Yes. So the Slow Owls Myth Association arises out of my research into like remedial or like therapeutic storytelling, and in particular like the lineage of Indo-European myths that I found to be the most fascinating and had the most potential for healing, particularly for dudes in the West, which is just the experience, you know, or at least for dudes with similar experiences to myself, in particular folks that are trying to like overcome alcoholism, addiction, weird like traumas that like might be like limiting artistic creativity, or just like being okay with themselves, or even like real simple things. Like all of my work kind of came out of this like real life changing events, like, you know, in my late 20s that just put me like plastered on my ass and kind of came up very, very slowly. You know, with the help of the Greatness of Saturn and like Vedic myth and like storytelling, you know, put me onto a whole way of life. So I was like, yo, this is the gateway drug. You know, I was like, with this you could rebuild a culture. And then I was like, wow, that's kind of an interesting coincidence that all like.
So what are you talking about? Are you talking about like some sort of combination of like tea, Irish poetry, and Tai Chi? Like, what are you talking about exactly? Like, what would save people?
Okay, so the lineage of storytelling that I took the most interest in is this ancient Indo-European myth of Soma. So Sloug's myth association is just an acrostic for the word Soma. Soma is one of the oldest known words for an entheogenic substance in the Indo-European language family. It's also the name in Jyotish or in like Vedic poetry and stuff for like the consciousness of the moon, for the working power of the moon. And in this context, it's actually seen as a masculine force. It's a young, active force, a moon with 27 wives. And the moon and its interaction with all those 27 wives, which are the 27 constellations of the, of the zodiac, of the night sky, there's stories within stories within stories that when you follow those lineages, then you'll find Hercules, Alexander, you'll find every myth you've ever seen accounted for, because they all come out of an Indo-European canon. These are just really the oldest records and kind of like the first principles of written Indo-European thinking. It's not necessarily representative of like the most like shamanic, fire-worshipping, nomadic, clans, because those guys keep secrets and like, but it's super deep still, and it is multi-level. It's just a connecting point for really for the right-brained part of Ayurveda in a way. Ayurveda is like very poetic, but it's all like technical, and it has like rules, and it has all this stuff. So they've got a lot of that, but then it's on I think an Ayurvedic practitioner of this time. Most of them probably have some familiarity with Jyotish, but if not, probably some side of remedial like storytelling, because now they have to fill that like psychological gap in their actual medical system. So I was sitting there being like, dude, why am I so fucking depressed? Or like, you know what I mean? Why is my dad and my grandpa, like, why do I have this like intergenerational sadness going on? I went through AA, I went to rehab, I did LAAA, you know what I'm saying? Like, I had to get like sober multiple times going through that. And I was like, dude, what if there was like a cool like mythology based kind of like secret society AA? The first edition of it is like the Slow Owls Men's Anonymous, And when I did like the best times that I actually had a really cool experience in AA, because it was like really cool storytelling based shit of just like these knuckleheaded dudes in meetings being like, oh bro, I fucking, and you're like, no way. And they're like, and I threw the thing out the fire escape, I went right in the cops with it. You're like, dude, this is amazing. It's like, these are like the live stories of like the drunks and the hustlers and the criminals and like, the dudes. You're like, these guys are amazing. And like, and I remember when I was in rehab being like, dude, like, addicts and alcoholics are kind of like wizards and magicians, like, because the shit they pull off, and a lot of them are artists and creative and like sentimental or psychic,
of it is really repressed.
Exactly,
trying to come out.
Exactly, and big souls, like big personalities through history have always drawn themselves like struggles through their own inner working, whatever it was that was gonna really make them tick and work for them, Yeah. So I just thought, all right, so we got the tea. And this is all kind of coming out of this. I got really into Silk Road, Indo-European mythology culture, and I was like, how is this stuff working? So what I found was you had these kind of Eurasian Taoist-ish, like nature worshipping all around in like different ways, but all coming together around tea, around fine poetry, silks, dancing, wonderful textiles, like incredible color, and like all the, like this vast network throughout like the Caucasus Steppe connecting Europe, Nepal, and like the backside of Europe and Germany and Central Europe and Turkey and shit. And I'm like, whoa, these are Celts too, You see like the most sacred place in Ireland, the Hill of Tara. Of all names, you know what I mean? Like green Tara being like the chief, bodhisattvic emanation of the goddess, and green Tara in particular. If you look at the Hill of Tara, it's like very green. So I started researching these connections between, like Buddhism and like Northern Europe via the Silk Road. And that's where like Indo-European mythology and culture really, like, that's where the rubber meets the road, like literally, like, for real. Like, so much trade, so much culture getting advanced due to this semi-nomadic, artistic, mercantile, free market, decentralized, very tribal, feuding, wagering, flea marketing, bargaining, hustling. It's like criminal, a little bit shady, a lot of bootlegging, like real life. Yep. Like good shit, you know what I'm saying? And like, and thriving, you know, like kingdoms rose and fall, very like mercantile, wonderful places. You still see like throughout Afghanistan, amazing like Buddhist or Buddhist inspired or Central Asian, very high level though, like made by meditators, made by ritual entheogenic type of people. Like this is like poet, artist stuff. These are not, you know, left-brained civilizations. Obviously, they're not administrative. Like, yeah, like, you know, even their administrative work is like hieroglyphic. You're like, what is this amazing thing? And they're like, this is actually the grain output from one city in Egypt. And you're like, it's fucking artistic. It's beautiful, you know. So that was the vibe where I'm like, AA's got like these things that like work so cool of that vulnerability. In particular, I really only went to what they call stag meetings or men's meetings. I ended up around old dudes. That's always been my thing. I always end up around like older people for whatever reason, and I got really lucky. And I saw what happens when like, in particular, dudes just sit down and like own some shit and like get real, and not necessarily like foofy or goof or anything different than like what they are. But I was like, this is cool. It's a safe spot. We can all use fake names if we want. People don't really do that anymore. I think they should. You know, I think it's really cool. We live in an internet screen name game or whatever. Like everybody should get a little spiritual nickname. I love that about Capoeira. They give you a Capoeira name. You just get a name in Portuguese. It's wonderful. Makes it fun, you know?
Yeah, I have a stage name. And it's as much a part of my identity as my
big time
legal name.
Big time. My mom did not actually name me Denise MacBootis, believe it or not. It came with time in different ways.
Comes with time, yeah. You earn it. Mm-hmm. And I think the best names are given usually too, often. But so I'm really excited for our collaboration. I do want to mention, just for the record, that about 6 months ago, maybe longer, could be 9 months, I had this very clear, intuitive download, I guess. It just arrived that like this idea that I should find an astrologer to collaborate on the Renaissance with. That that some of the frustrations that I've been having have been what I call the non-showy uppiness of people. And not just COVID. I mean, a lot of it started in my circle, like back with when cancel culture started really going and destroying people and stuff. And so it's just been a lot of fear that keeps people from connecting. But it made a lot of sense to me for this Renaissance that I'm hoping we can get going to work with an astrologer, just because, for one thing, it's reconnected me to the Earth through the cycles of the actual planet because of the sky. So that alone, I was like, okay, I'm going to go find an astrologer to work with. And it was funny because I was literally cold calling astrologers, or I would start following astrology. You know, obviously, like I have the astrologers I've been working with for years and following and things like that, and asked. You were the 7th one, and it's really funny because you showed up really like on my doorstep, actually, not even the astrologer that I went to go get. Mm-hmm. That street down there is where I used to work on a weed farm.
Oh.
I'm trying to get out of the weed business, y'all. I'm trying to get back to being an artist.
That's a sticky business.
Yeah.
That's a sticky business.
You know, which might be a great place to just talk about what we're doing next, which is, you know, now that you're at the nest and you're doing your work, you're doing your calligraphy work and playing guitar, and we're getting ready for a show and we're building the place, and it has been amazing literally having just a working artist in the room with me. It's very inspiring. So one of the first things you suggested, because I was about to launch a GoFundMe just to get a little tiny chunk of money together to try to finish the thing, and you were like, we're going to need a lot more money. We should just finish it right and finish it now, so that we can just do the damn work on it. And I was like, you're right. I didn't really do a full budget when I was thinking about that. So when I added in actually sound equipment, lighting, floor surface, aerial rigging, mats, and I do think this is important because I did just sprain my elbow falling off a step ladder.
Yeah, just to do it safely, because we have such a bootleg warehouse mentality.
Yep.
We're like, well, we are like in our 40s and we're getting injured in here.
Yeah, right.
Like,
we're padding. We're making the padded room that we need.
We're getting injured in construction. So, I want my mom to be able to come out someday. You know what I'm saying?
So yeah, so we are in the middle of this big fundraiser. So I hope all of you listening will share this, and you can hear, what we're talking about. We're trying to get a little tiny space to be having slow owls meetings.
Spread the bird.
Spread the bird.
Spread the bird.
We're going to be doing mostly incubator shows, like for private audiences. Just to test run things, which I think will be really fun, and to film lots of things, making it so that it can be either a set for doing online work or doing in-person work or whatever it is, and really just get the tea flowing, trying to have that Artist Elks Lodge vibe going out here a bit. So I'd love to hear
Horns up.
Anything else you want to add about your planned contribution to the nest or to the Renaissance, and what you kind of hope for the future. This is a new moon too, so.
New moony moon. Oh man, I forgot all about that. So fascinating, yeah. So our collaboration began exactly a moon ago.
That's true.
On the 5th.
Yeah.
On the 5th. So, and then today in the Jyotish perspective, yeah, I think the sun was at like 18 degrees of Libra, which is, if you're into King Arthur or Arthurian mythology at all, or like swordspersonship and the whole mythology of the sword, this is a constellation in Libra that is symbolized by a sword and has always been symbolized by a sword to all places. And when you start from that constellation, you start to like see the mythology and the roots of it, where it comes from, in like a totally different way. It's like one example that's so interesting to me about Jyotish. They're not even necessarily trying to preserve King Arthur per se, but they preserve in the system this constellation called Svati, just like Saraswati. It's got this like higher wisdom, highest discrimination. Like Saraswati's the best. She's also peacock goddess, which has that references to Archangel Michael, Quetzalcoatl, all that higher aroused wisdom of the peacock, the blue-green wisdom of the sky and the trees, if you will. All the nature cult. Saw the serpent of the ridge of the trees. Don't forget, like the blue-green of that we're looking at right now is so cool, and like serpentine and super mystical. It's like literally magic hour. Like, look at that. That's crazy. So the new moon is in this constellation that they call Svati, but the symbol, which is very important in the system, every star has one key symbol that's associated with it, is a sword. And in this constellation is where we find the big, bright, even way bigger than our sun star called Arcturus, which is where the word Arctur comes from. Arctur is named after this star, Arcturus, that's symbolized by a sword in the middle of Libra, which shows the absolute discrimination. The true scales of Libra, the hemispheres of the brain. We want to go like high level, like yogi style, then we're dealing with hemispheres of the brain, then we're dealing with the scales of the Hermetic marketplace, and then the lower marketplace, and then the scales of justice, because those are, you know what I'm saying? The true scales of justice are the hemispheres of our own intelligence, and this is the sword of discrimination. So if you want to get like auspicious and you know what I mean, kind of like holographic or story, like story based with it, then you would look in this scenario, particularly it being a new moon, which is a no moon. It's a dead moon. It's a rising, it's a waxing after waning kind of moon.
It's a blank canvas.
And see if you can plug yourself in, or plug into yourself in your own story of the moment, or your greater like life story, this Arthurian element of where you may have been outcast, where you may have been exiled for whatever reason. It could be like social or literal, or just maybe you felt that way and that's enough, because that's all we really care about. And where you've had to work and grind and like go deep into yourself and like really weigh the scales of, of justice, of the marketplace, which is internally is always your self-worth. Libra is a place of calibration. The word calibration, which is like so important in esoteric and occult thought, the ability to see an image and see an experience and calibrate it up, making it, seeing the higher element, the higher light of it. That's why, again, why I love Jyotish, like the study of light. It's the study
really
of
beautiful.
how this calibrates. Like, all right, so what is this? It's like, yo, this is an image. And what's the idea? Idea is like King Arthur and a sword, but it's a sword of discrimination. But if you jumble the letters in sword, it spells words. So it's also about, you know, how you dole out justice to yourself and how you see yourself in your inner marketplace, your own self-worth, your own self-value. How does that exchange go on between the right and left hemispheres, if you will? How does that go down between the right and left sides of yourself? And even, you know, as I'm saying, I'm like kind of shaking the right side and left side of my my right and left arms, and it has a serpentine element to it. And the sword is up, like bing, it shines like up into the, you know, it's like shiny silver, it's, you know, lunar and solar at the same time. But what's really interesting is this is where in all astrology the sun is debilitated in Libra, meaning the sun performs its worst as a mystical or force or whatever, but also it's just autumn. The sun's dying and it's autumn, you know, but it all kind of comes together in this system of thought, which makes it so beautiful. But so we're talking about a period where the sun is debilitated. So that's the part of the astro-theological part of the mythology of Arctur, you know, which means like bear keeper, you know, like Arc is like Arcos is the bear in Latin. Tur is a super amazing vowel, but it's like Tur is like Thor or Netur or nature, and Tur is a super sacred ancient sound. So Arctur and Arcturus are very ancient, very profound syllables that resonate still all the way down to Arctur, and then, you know, in Latin, and then Arthur in English. What the whole myth is talking about is finding the place in you where your solar, you don't got to be a boy, don't got to be a man, it's just your solar flame, your light of your imagination, the inner light that illuminates your dreams. How do you see your dreams? If you're asleep with your eyes closed, because there's an inner light. It's called solar light. It's the inner flame. It's super cool, right? So wherever that inner imagination, right? Imagination being a magi nation, right? Like a nation of magicians. Wherever that has been dimmed and exiled and needs to rise again and make a profound statement about itself, which the King Arthur story is very much about, like rising up and scrabbling through and being able to round yourself up and your own inner confidence, and then round up some troops and like get some shit done. This is a super auspicious time to get that going, because it's already working. The natural elements, like that's what that story is about. That's a patchwork version of what that story is about, and you know, there's a lot more going on. But
maybe I'll have you back on to do a review of
Guy
Ritchie's.
I'll be around.
You can review Guy Ritchie's new King Arthur movie for us.
Watching that movie. Yeah, I liked it so much more than I thought it would, you know.
So, okay, and what about your hopes, plans for this Renaissance, which we are enchanting for?
Well, I think, you know, if you're to build a culture, you need hospitality. If you're doing hospitality, then you got to have tea, and you got to have a warm fire, and you got to have song and dance, and you got to have hospitality and stuff, you know. So we'll be pouring some tea and inviting some people over, like workshopping ideas, just being in character sometimes, being not, just, you know, just keeping it underground warehouse goofball style, and then, you know what I mean, and but being on a schedule, and you know, we are building a stage and doing like technical and like carpentry and moving and storage, you know, we're mixing it all up.
Well, Mr. Donny Boots, if that is your real name, thank you so much for this interview. I really look forward to all your contributions at the Nest and maybe on this podcast. Who knows? It's been fun having you around so far, and I really can't wait to see what's next.
It's been my genuine esoteric pleasure.
So that was our episode. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to sign up for the email list on vivalarenaissance.net. Please contribute any amount you can to our GoFundMe, Hatch the Nest. And we're sending out some really nice, lovely handmade esoteric folk art gifts. Even just $20, you get some stickers from us. I've got a new nest sticker that I made, one of my illustrations. I've got some what I call hipster tourism stickers of the Yuba River. And we've got some handmade calligraphy saying thank you and all kinds of stuff. And, the more you give, the better the gifts are. I've got some handmade jewelry that I made and paintings and all kinds of things. So be sure to contribute. Let's get this thing done, because you don't even know what kind of craziness is in store. Once the stage is built, they will come. All right, kids, thanks for listening. Hang in there. Keep it weird. Love you. Mean it. Bye.